everyone, and welcome to Creative Edge Writers Showcase. I'm your host, Christie Stratos, author of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart and Lock and Key, and owner of my editing company at proofpositivepro.com. This show is part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Our guest tonight is two-time Aurora Award nominee Suzy Vadori, who's with us today. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Christy. I'm excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you write.
Sure. I'm a young adult author, and right now I have out the Fountain series, which has two books released. The first book is The Fountain, and the second book is The West Woods, and both have been nominated, as you just mentioned, for Aurora Awards. This one in 2016, and this one is current. So that's really exciting.
It's really exciting. And so far this year, they're still the nominations. It's just nominations, right? It hasn't been announced who's won.
That's right. We'll find out in October. So lots of time to get out there and join the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association, and you can go and vote.
That's fantastic. So you've been an author, I believe, now for about 3 years. I think July is supposed to be your anniversary date. Am I right?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
So are you writing on the side at this point, or are you writing full-time?
Just as of this year, I'm writing full-time. So I actually wrote The Fountain on maternity leave with my third child, and she's 6 now. So it took me quite a while to get it written and get it published. And I did go back to work in the interim. I was an operations executive, so a vice president at a company. And I looked at my schedule coming into the spring, and I've been wanting to write full-time for quite some time, as I think a lot of us want to. And I looked at my schedule this spring, and with everything that I booked, I'm doing speaking engagements, I'm doing school programs, I'm doing events. And so everything that I had there, I'm like, I don't have time to work anymore. So it was a really neat transition. It just kind of, I was trying to build it on the side until it was enough. And then all of a sudden it was enough. And I went, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready, but it's time, so here we go. And so, yeah, about 3 months in, and it's been really, really exciting. I started a company called Write It Programs, and so it's programs that are in schools for lunch hour and after school programs for creative writing programs. And so it's been really exciting. So I'm just talking to schools now about what's going to happen in September. We're just wrapping up the programs that I did in the spring. So lots going on.
Fantastic. It's, that's the dream that everyone hopes that they can someday quit their job. But can you say, like, did your full-time job contribute anything either to your writing career or maybe even to the marketing end, anything like that?
Oh, most definitely. I think as a business executive for the last 22 years, I learned a thing or two about starting a business. And I think that most writers should, or are the ones that are successful, are treating their writing like a business. So different people, one of the most fascinating things to me about meeting different writers is figuring out how they're making it all work. And like you said, most writers want to work full time. So the ones who are doing it full time, how are they doing it? And almost nobody is doing it just with their books and their sales of their books, unless they're writing a lot of books and have that formula down. And then even though it looks like they're making all their money from their books, they might be making their money from online advertising and figuring out, dialing it in and spending a lot of time doing things that are other than writing. So there's different ways to kind of cobble that career together. And I've talked to so many authors and figured out what they're doing. And right now I'm trying to do a whole bunch of those pieces. And I think that it will settle into the ones that work for me and work with my talents. So
that's exciting. Yeah. For me, it was, and this may be similar for you. I was a project manager before I quit my full-time job. And for me, for the editing process, for the entire writing process, it really made a difference to have, that background. So, I can imagine being a business executive, you would have lots of, project management, product management, maybe marketing, like all kinds of different experience.
Yeah, you name it. So most people, I say I was an operations executive, and they kind of look at me blankly and say, well, what is that? So you probably know exactly what that is. And it means that I manage everything within the company, from accounting to marketing to manufacturing in some cases, or software development, depending on what companies I've worked for. And I've worked for quite a few. So yes, absolutely. I'm used to multitasking. I'm used to getting things done. And I'm used to building awesome teams. And I think that within the writing community, it's really neat to find people that you can work with and that can help you out with different aspects of your career, and to have that sort of outreach in that team so that you're not doing it all by yourself, and so that we're helping one another. So that's been really neat.
Absolutely. Let's get into your Aurora Award nomination. Can you tell us what the Aurora Awards are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Aurora Awards are Canada's premier science fiction and fantasy awards. They honor the best in Canada, and so for my books, they've been nominated for Best Young Adult Novel, but there's categories from Best Novel, Best Young Adult Novel. There's categories for Best Song. There's categories for Best Related Work, which could be a podcast or something, or a fan related work. So there's lots of different categories. There's also categories for Best Fan Organizational, which the festival that I've been a part of for 6 years now, When Words Collide, and we can talk about that too if you want, has won a number of times. I'm not sure how many, 4 or 5 times. So it's really exciting. It's a chance to honor the best in science fiction and fantasy, and it is member nominated and member voted. And what that means is you can become a member of the CSFFA, it's a bit of a mouthful, for $10. And so for $10, you can go become a member of the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association. You can nominate the works that you enjoy, so your favorite books and other related works, and you actually get a say in it. And what that means is now that the nominations are done and the ballot is done, then they create a voter package with the shortlist, and you end up getting all of those works. So my publisher was asked to submit The Westwoods, which is the one that's nominated this year, for the voters package. So most authors or most publishing houses do submit the full work. And then so if you've paid your $10 and you're a member, you actually get to read the best of the best in Canadian science fiction and fantasy for the year for $10. And then you get to go and vote. So they want to make sure that people are making an informed decision, that it's not, just a popularity contest or a race to the finish, that people are evaluating the works and seeing what it is that they like. And so that's how it works.
That's really interesting, because one of the things I was going to ask is, I think your publisher is Evil Alter Ego Press, right? And I was wondering how exactly it works with contests when you have a publisher and you win or are nominated for a contest. For self-published people like me, I have to go looking for contests that accept self-published, and then I have to submit it and I have to do all this stuff. So I was actually wondering how much you know about the process. Now, I know you said something just now about that your book was submitted, it was requested. Could you clarify what exactly that means?
So it is completely a voter nominated. So to get on the ballot, you don't need to be requested. But once you're shortlisted on the ballot, then they do request from the publisher to get the works to share with the membership base. So, but yeah, there's different rules for all kinds of different contests, and I know I've looked at some of them as well. And I am traditionally published, but with a very small publisher. Evil Alter Ego Press is based in Alberta, and it only produces YA. I'm going to get this wrong, but I think my books were number 7 and number 10. Like, it's a small press. And they're publishing a couple of new authors this year as well. So we're working together, but I don't qualify for some of the larger awards. In Canada, some of the bigger ones, like the Governor General Award, you have to have had a print run of hundreds of thousands or whatever the number is. There's definitely some rules that make it difficult to enter contests. So that's why it's really neat to find some of these that we are eligible for. And the Aurora Awards, you are eligible if you are self-published, if you're a small press, if you're a large press. Certainly there's lots of traditionally published authors. There's a Scholastic book in my category that's on the shortlisted ballot. So it's definitely from all different sizes and shapes of publishers.
I have my fingers crossed for you that you're going to win this year. But regardless, a nomination is awesome. I mean, I'd be thrilled about that. I was just reading about someone who was Writers of the Future. They were going into that contest over and over again, and they were rejected and rejected. And then finally, at some point, they got honorable mention, and then they got a lot of honorable mentions, and they kept submitting until they actually won. So, it is like an encouraging thing. It's an exciting thing. So my fingers are crossed for you.
Thank you so much. It's just an honor to be nominated. There's tons of great people on the ballot, and it's been a lot of fun. So to have the series be recognized not once, but twice, it starts to make you think that you've got something special. And sometimes second books don't get the same kind of love that the first books get. So it's almost doubly heartwarming when a second book in a series that people actually, support it is really cool. So I appreciate everybody who voted.
Did your publisher buy 3 books from you, or did they buy, or did you sign a contract for 1 book and then 2 books, or how exactly did that work? Because, like you said, it's really exciting and relatively rare that a second book is equally, as good as the first or gets the same attention. And it seems like your publisher is very interested in what you're doing and likes it a lot.
Yes, definitely. And it was always our intention to put out all 3 books. And so that was what we decided at the beginning. And so the third book is called Wall of Wishes, and it will be out sometime early next year. So early 2019. We haven't set a publication date because I haven't finished the book yet. I'm actually writing 2 books simultaneously right now. I'm writing the third book in this series, and I'm writing the first book of a brand new fantasy series, which will be for 14 plus. So this book is sort of targeted at 11 to 16-year-olds. It's a bit of the gap between middle grade and the more traditional 14 plus. I think it was really important to do that. And the publisher was really excited about it. It's really hard to market. So when there's no shelf for it, and there's no marketing plan for it, and there's no category for it in Amazon. So it's a bit of an anomaly. I'm really glad I did it. When I hit those awesome teens that are ready for a book that is written in a language that's, more of an adult aptitude that you need to read it, but yet the content is appropriate for that younger audience. And I think I've got kids of my own, and that's a really big issue. Is middle grade is great for 9 to 12, but really it's great for 9 to 10. And then those 11-year-olds that are strong readers are looking for something else, but we're not letting them read the stuff that's sort of for upper YA yet. So
I know that you have done, speaking of YA, some charity work, and I believe you've done it maybe 2 years in a row, but I know you've done it in general. The charity was called Kids Help Phone, and I believe that the event was called Books for a Good Cause, and it had happened in December. And I think it was started by Adam Dries. Could you tell us a little bit about that effort and what exactly it is?
You bet. So because my books deal with friendship and rivalry and things of that nature, when I go to schools and when I talk to teens, they want to talk about why Courtney's so mean. And I end up having this conversation with adults, particularly about, well, is it a book about bullying? Well, I didn't set out to write a book about bullying, and I'm not wanting to go around to schools and talk about bullying, but I do talk about friendships and I do talk about rivalry. And so I kind of fell backwards into supporting Kids Help Phone because they have a really strong anti-bullying campaign, and supporting kids. What Kids Help Phone is, just for those of you who don't know, it's a national Canadian help phone line. And it's for kids, it's for parents, it's for whoever wants to call. They like to say you can call for absolutely anything, including if you were left home alone and you forget how to make the mac and cheese. They want you to feel comfortable calling early so that when you actually have a situation, you can call later. And so because I'm in schools, it just seemed like such a natural fit to start talking about that, because kids are talking to me about their situation at their schools because of what I wrote. Because I wrote stories about strong friendships and stories about rivals that come in and try to break up those friendships and the awful things that happen to them, and then the ways that they got around it. So they're not books about bullying, but it ended up being that conversation. So yes, Adam Dries had started, I believe, 3 years ago now. And the last 2 years, we've done a campaign. Last year we did it kind of in parallel, and then this year we did it together, supporting Kids Help Phone, Books for a Good Cause. And it's a lot of fun. We sell books through our networks and beyond, and we sell them at a discount, and then we give $5 a book to Kids Help Phone. And then we run around at Christmas time and deliver these signed books, which is a really cool gift within the Calgary city limits. And so it's been a lot of fun. And it was his idea initially to go door to door, and I was doing something similar just with my own friend group. The Fountain came out in December, so it was kind of a natural thing to say, hey, anybody want signed books? And then all of a sudden you have 100 orders and you're running around, and it's a lot of fun, and you can tell your friends about it. And so it was really, really fun to do it for a really good cause.
That's great. Yeah. And then they read those books. And like you said, even if you didn't intend for it to be about bullying, those kids are getting those messages. So that's really fantastic. And that was actually something I wanted to ask you. Since you're writing in young adult, I wanted to ask if there were any lessons that you intended on putting across. And bullying is when you didn't intend to, but you put it across anyway, which is fantastic. So I noticed that on the first book, The Fountain, it says, be careful what you wish for. And then maybe there's a different lesson to the second one. Can you tell us if there's anything you were trying to put across to young adults out there through your fantasy novels?
There absolutely is, but I wanted to make sure that it was entertaining and not heavy-handed as well. I'm a mom, and so when I wrote The Fountain, as I said, I had just had my third child, and just thinking about parenting and how different it is for kids today, and how we want to give them everything in the whole world and give it to them when they want it, how they want it. And it's a bit of a shift from, I don't know about when you grew up, but when I grew up, that was not the case. And I want to do it for my kids, but it's also this thing where you're kind of like, ooh, I wonder what the next generation is going to be like if we do this. And so the germ of the idea for The Fountain really came from what if, and I knew I was going to write a boarding school novel because I love boarding school novels. What if a well-meaning founder at the school actually gave the kids this magical fountain that he had the power to create? He gave them this magical fountain that granted their wishes with unlimited bounds. And so the first couple of people within the science fiction and fantasy community that I met with said, well, what are the rules of the fountain? And, it doesn't make any sense to have it be far reaching and be able to do anything. And I'm saying, well, that's the point. But the kids don't know that their wishes are going to come true. So they're throwing coins into this fountain and they're changing the world one wish at a time. And so my other half of my brain that loves math really found it a tricky mystery to be able to rewrite time and rewrite history. So the wish that she makes is she wishes that one of the girls that she just met who hadn't been kind to her had never existed. And when she goes back to the boarding school that she attends, the girl is gone and absolutely everything in her whole world has changed, including her own family. So it's really fun to have those sort of timeline warps within that fantasy novel. And as the series goes on, the wishes compound and you have to keep track of everything that's changed and who knows what and who remembers, because only the person who wished it remembers. But some really big changes. So that was where it came from. But yes, there's a lesson in there. Be careful what you wish for. What are we doing? What if we gave kids absolutely everything in the world that they ever wanted? Do they even know what to do with that? And what are the consequences? And how would they deal with that if they actually got what they wanted?
Yeah, those are great points, and they actually speak to even more than that. Probably, like in the real world, we have all these age limitations. You can only drink at this age or do this at this age. Even renting a car is a certain age, and so it's kind of interesting because you can apply what you just said. If you had your wishes and you could do these things younger, do you really understand the consequences of what you're actually doing? So I could see where that really applies to them learning, skills that they will actually need in the real world. That's really interesting. And I noticed that you were talking about, and I had seen on your blog too, that boarding school fiction is something that you really like in young adult. And so I saw, before you explained that, I saw boarding school, I saw magic, and I thought, I wonder if you were inspired at all by Harry Potter. And I know that that's like, this huge series, of course. I'm sure lots of people ask you that, but as a YA author, there are lots of popular YA series. So I was wondering, what were you inspired by?
Well, definitely, I love Harry Potter, and my kids love Harry Potter. But I think the roots of these novels go back a lot further than that, because I was an adult when Harry Potter came out, and I read them as an adult. I think I picked it up when there was already 4 books out, and then eagerly awaited the next books to come out. But Gordon Corman is a Canadian author who wrote some books. Actually, he started writing when he was 13 or 14. He was a teen himself. And I like to talk about those books because they were middle grade books. And they were about a place called McDonald Hall, which is a boarding school. And they had that sneak in and out of night and wander around the campus and get into trouble kind of feel. And that was my original, I started writing books about boarding schools. I never finished any of them, but I started writing them when I was a tween, after having read Gordon Corman. Now, these books have nothing to do with those books at all. These kids are 16, not 9, and they're, it's a very different world, but that same excitement, that same piece is there. Definitely Harry Potter is inspiring to all of us. My kids are forever saying, Mom, you could be the next J.K. Rowling. I'm saying, but there's only one, like she's the only one. It's not like that happens all the time. So hopefully, but yeah, those books are a magical world, and the Fountain series, at least, isn't a magical world. It's a regular world without magic that happens to have magical elements in it. So it ended up being a magical realism series. So I think that really sets it apart. It's not a school where there's witches and creatures and they're aware of what's happening. It's a school where they're just going about their business, and then all of a sudden these magical things start happening and nobody believes them. So that was a lot of fun to write too.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I was also wondering if your children have inspired any of your writing.
Oh, definitely. When The Fountain was released, my oldest daughter, she was 9, and she did read it. It was a little bit tricky for her still. She's a strong reader, but 9's a bit young. And so she came back to me and she was mortified. She said, Mom, there's kissing in your book, because there's romance, right? It's a fantasy romance. And so she said, yeah. And I said, yeah, is that okay? And she's like, well, I guess so. But it actually opened a dialogue, which was cool. And then when the Westwoods came out, she was 11, and she and her friends, actually a couple of her friends, write themselves and also have book blogs. And so I asked them to join my mostly adult and more teenage beta read group. And so they read the Westwoods in an early form, and they didn't say anything about the kissing in the Westwoods. They didn't complain at all, because at 11, that was okay, I guess, and they were expecting it. But yeah, they came back and actually had me make the friendship stronger. And I thank them for that. That group of younger tweens that read with that beta group, they came back and said, you know what? We would really like a story that's more about friendship and less about the trials of friendship. We want them to be more supportive of one another. And so that was really cool, because the Westwoods ended up being more a story about friendship, which is what I was already teaching about in schools. It kind of played more into the messaging that I want to have anyway. I just think in young adult, we try to make things so difficult for the kids. And that's part of the formula, right? Is make it harder, make it harder, make it harder, make it harder, so that they have to worm their way out of it. And they actually wanted a bit of relief from that. And I gave it to them, and that's the way it turned out. So.
Yeah, it seems to me that having young beta readers for young adult novels would be fantastic. And I know that most of the time people will go for beta readers just in general, and a lot of times as adult writers, we'll end up with adult beta readers, even though it's YA. So I would think that, that having YA actual young adults reading, who are supposed to be the age range you're aiming for anyway, that would help a whole lot. It's really excellent to hear just how your book changed because of that feedback. It's really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. One of the most difficult things that I'm lucky to have a lot of tweens and teens in my life. I mean, I have my own kids and their friends, but I'm also in schools a lot. And so I do get that feedback, and I do interact with readers. So I'm very lucky. But what young adult books still need to appeal to adults. And not just if you want to do the crossover bit, which is the marketer's dream, right? But most of, actually all of my reviewers are adults. I can't think of one. Even the kids who are really keen, they don't have Amazon accounts, and they might have a Goodreads account, but they're shy and they usually don't review. So your reviewers and professional reviewers of young adult books are going to be adults. And so you're going to have to get them to read it and make sure that it appeals to them as well, and that it kind of all hangs together. So it's a bit of a tricky one.
On the topic of when you were saying about difficulties, like putting these characters through difficulties, on your blog, you wrote something that I wanted to read to you and ask you a couple of questions about. And that was, and this is a quote from you, it's really interesting. Tough choices are why young adult books like The Hunger Games and anything by John Green are such sensations. We want to know what it would feel like to be in a really tough situation. What would we do? What is right and what is wrong? And what choices do we sometimes have to make to just get through the day? And I do feel like that quote really applies to much of fiction, where I might want to read about just a different lifestyle and, exactly, what is the difference? What does someone go through in a different lifestyle from day to day, But specifically for YA, do you think that sometimes readers, young adult readers, want to read like what happens when you choose the wrong thing? Which, it's sometimes difficult to do that in life. And sometimes when you make a mistake as a young adult, you sort of feel like it's the end of the world, So do you think that they like to read what happens when you make a wrong choice?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that kids want to know. And I talked about that special group of kids that's 10 to 13 that love to read, but can't read the Twilights yet, or can't read, some of the things that their parents deem as inappropriate as yet because they're violent or they're sex or there's something inappropriate in it still for them. But they still are curious. So putting teens in those situations and letting them live out their dreams and fantasies through a different lens is terrific. One of the other things that I just thought of that's in The Fountain in particular is, I'm trying to do it without a spoiler, but the idea that you don't need to necessarily marry the first guy that you've ever met, right? So there might be some changes that happen there. And I think that's a great message for kids, because if you don't go through a breakup until you're 25, maybe you think that is the end of the world and you never recover from that, versus being able to safely know that, if it's not right for you, it's okay to change your mind, or it's okay to do something different. So that was another one that I had a couple of adult readers actually react really strongly to and say, well, she shouldn't have done that. Well, why not? She's 16 and she's dating somebody. She can change her mind. It's not like she was going around behind his back, so she can change her mind. So, I think that's really neat for teens to be able to explore in a safe environment and be able to feel like they've been through something and feel like they're making adult choices. Young adult books put teens in adult situations. That's, part of what they do. And to do that, you have to kill the parents or send them away to school or do something so that because parents have credit cards and parents have cell phones and kids have cell phones too, but they can actually call somebody and be taken seriously, and they can solve problems that kids don't always know how to do. So it's a lot more fun to have them bumble through it on their own.
That's very true. And the mix of fantasy and YA is a really great one also because they get to experience what's impossible, in the fantasy end of things. And then they get to experience what's actually possible and realistic through YA concepts. So, when you put that all together with everything you're saying, it's sort of living a different life. And like you said, really learning a lot, actually. It's not just for fun always. So what I also wanted to ask you was, I saw that at some point, I think you've gone on a writer's retreat. I also know you've done When Worlds Collide, or When Words Collide, excuse me. So I wanted to ask how those experiences were. Would you recommend them? Tell us a little bit about them.
Oh, definitely. So when I finished The Fountain, I kind of wrote it on my own, and I'd done a few courses at the local university just to make sure that I knew what I was doing, because I'd done a lot of technical writing, but I hadn't done creative writing since university. So to make sure that I was sort of on track and I was reminding myself about what I should be looking for when I'm writing. But I looked around when I was done for a young adult community in Calgary or in Alberta, and I didn't really find exactly what I was looking for. I did find some school programs to get involved with, and there were some other things, but those were for established writers. They weren't for aspiring writers like myself. But what I did find was this multi-genre festival called When Words Collide. And it happens every August in Calgary. And I'd heard about it from a couple of different people, but it was only April. And I'm like, okay, I'm the project manager, right? No. It's April and I need to know now what to do with, what do I do? I wrote a book and now I want to go publish it, right? How do I find out faster? So I went to one of their board meetings, because they have them posted on their website just to listen. And they made me the head of young adult programming at that board meeting, because I had met a couple of people who'd sent me in that direction. And I kind of said, well, I heard from so-and-so and so-and-so who were two young adult authors that I contacted. They both sent me to this festival. And so they said, well, you seem to know people in the young adult community. You could organize our young adult programming. And I went, well, okay, I'm still on maternity leave at the time. So I'm like, all right, sure. So I went ahead and they gave me a list of 30 topics. And they said, well, these are things that we dreamed up that we might want to put in YA. So can you, call around and see if you can get some interest and get some people to present? So I said, sure. So I spent the time while my kids were in daycare and everything else. They were, a couple hours a week that I had been spending time writing. And I made some phone calls and made some emails. And then I went back to them and I said, okay, at the next meeting, I said, I filled the 30 topics. We have 45 young adult authors coming to the festival. What can I do now? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? They're like, we've only ever had 2 or 3 hours of programming every time. Like, we gave you that list, like, pick some, see if you could get some interest. And they were laughing, but I actually got a standing ovation, but I was very embarrassed because it wasn't what they meant for me to do. But the chairman, Randy McCharles, he was fabulous. He was like, no, this is terrific. Good job. They rented another room for the entire weekend of the festival, and they made a young adult track for programming. And so that was 6 years ago. And now we still have 30 hours of programming during that weekend. So I kind of created my own young adult community. And I was getting calls from writing groups across Alberta saying, hey, can you come and talk to our group about what it is to be a young adult writer before I was even published? And I'm like, guys, I'm not even published. And they're like, really? Because everybody says you're the person to talk to about young adult, because I've been calling all these people telling them that they have to come to our festival for young adults. So it was really cool. It kind of started me off with a bang, and I had the opportunity to meet all kinds of really neat people who've helped me so much, and I respect tremendously and work with every day now.
What a
Lucky.
fantastic experience. And it's amazing that you actually kind of ended up coming up with this track accidentally. And I'm sure a lot of people are grateful for that now that it's been created. So thank you so much for being on the show, Suzy. Please let us know where readers can find you after the broadcast.
Absolutely. So my website is suzyvadori.wordpress.com.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us on the Creative Edge Writers Showcase. This has been a copyrighted podcast owned by the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network and Creative Edge Marketing. We'll be back July 5th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time with psychological thriller author Kelly Charon, author of Pretty Wicked and Wicked Fallout. In the meantime, you can look up our show on Facebook for updates, and we will see you in our next episode.